What have other people done? And people will chime in with their personal experiences. It's really great because a lot of these conversations aren't happening in other spaces, especially if a student might be the only kid at their high school who uses a wheelchair, right? They might not have a lot of people around them who have gone through that specific experience. So to find a group where, people are sharing these experiences can be really helpful. If you don't see yourself represented and nobody's speaking to sort of like what your experience could be like and what the options are, it's hard to envision how it's all going to work.
Welcome to the Worthy for 30 podcast. I am your host, Eric Tash. Join us as we delve into the world of impactful business leaders who are setting the bar high. Worthy for 30 carefully curates its guests, engaging with business trailblazers who embody the ethos of doing good while doing well. In each episode, we extract actionable tips and wisdom from these visionaries, offering you a blueprint to merge success with social impact. Ready to elevate your business game? Let's dive in and learn how to do good while thriving. Worthy for 30, where purpose meets profit. Welcome back to another episode of the Worthy for 30 podcast. I'm your host, Eric Tash, and with me today is Annie Tulkin, the founder of Accessible College. And what's interesting, and the way that Annie and I connected, is through another guest, Mindy Shire, Runway of Dreams and Gammon Management. And it's funny, I was on social media and Mindy shared a piece of content from Annie in Accessible College. And I said to Mindy, I need to meet Annie. And she's like, okay, hold on a second. And it was like instantaneous. And it was funny, just before Annie and I started recording, she had to make a technology update and it was seamless. It was Google Chrome. It was very easy. And the thing that I love about, and again, the parallel here between technology and relationships is that, when there's a lot of giving, there's an embrace of what, each of us are doing. Anytime, and again, I'm very appreciative of Mindy. When I reached out, she was very receptive and very proactive in connecting us today. So Annie, welcome to Worthy for 30.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here, Eric.
Yes, excellent. So let's get started. I'd love for you to tell the audience and the community how Accessible College came about and what is Accessible College?
Accessible College, I provide college transition support for students with physical disabilities and chronic health conditions. And physical disabilities is kind of a big tent term. So it might be students who use wheelchairs or mobility devices, or sometimes use a wheelchair or mobility device. Also students with different types of chronic health conditions like autoimmune disorders, POTS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Crohn's, diabetes, basically anything that might impact a student in their college search process and as they're sort of preparing for independent living on a college campus. And I got into this because I myself have some chronic health conditions. And I used to be the associate director of the Disability Support Office at Georgetown University. And so when I was working there were so many students who were coming in and didn't really know, like, what does this look like in college? And how do I do this? And what accommodations can I request? And, how do I get my medications and manage my doctor's appointments? And so I looked around and there were a lot of support services and folks who were supporting students with learning disabilities, ADD, and autism, but nobody really supporting students with physical disabilities and health conditions. And so Accessible College was born.
That is amazing. So you were at Georgetown for 6 years?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And so during that time, again, students were coming to you, asking these questions. And when they were asking you these questions, how did you connect the dots to say, okay, is there a service like Accessible College out there? What was your evaluation? What was your research from then on?
Yeah, students were coming to me with questions, but oftentimes they didn't even know what questions they should be asking. So part of what I do now is equip students with questions that they should be asking as they're investigating schools. But in terms of sort of like a market analysis of like what was out there and what was going on, my background is in education and in the disability field. So I'd been working in the disability field all of my professional career. What I started doing was sort of the basic things that most people start to do, right? Some Google searching, some looking around, some tracking on social media. Conversations with people who had sort of similar business strategies too, to look at like, what are they seeing? Do they know anybody who does this sort of work? And, what I found was that no, there was nobody doing physical disabilities and chronic health condition in the sort of like tailored, customized approach that I provide. And there wasn't really a lot of writing, blog at that time. I mean, I started things back in kind of 2016, 2017. There wasn't really a lot of writing either with like student experiences or what students should be thinking about. And so it started as a side hustle and has since become a full-fledged business. Yes.
That is amazing. So from 2016 to now.
Yeah.
And I just want to stop here for a second because this is a great inflection point. I've had previous guests who are entrepreneurial minded or entrepreneurs. They've built businesses, whether in the for-profit or nonprofit sector. And they had that same sort of inflection. Like, okay, questions are being asked to me, or why is this happening? And instead of, doing some elaborate, research that costs money and time, like you, Annie, they went onto social media. They started to speak with folks, just trying to like pressure test, like, is this available? Is this real? And then it became, okay, there's really nothing out there. Why not me? Why can I not do this? And I think you took that incredible step to say, hey, let's start a service for college-bound students with physical disabilities and chronic health conditions as a side hustle, and then it evolved into a full-fledged business, which is incredible. Transitioning into colleges, there are tens of thousands of colleges. So can you walk us through like the step-by-step process? Again, I'm a rising senior in high school with physical disabilities and with chronic health conditions. What should I be doing? What should be that first step in terms of selecting a school that can accommodate my needs?
It's a great question. Ideally, students and families are starting to think about this before senior year of high school, ideally, recognizing too that like we are all busy people and there's a lot of moving parts and we only have so much capacity. But ideally, students are sort of thinking about this upfront as they're beginning their college search. And for most students, that starts like junior year of high school. That's when they start to tune in to, what's going on. It's when their college counselor at their school might start asking more questions or providing more information on like, hey, maybe you should go on some tours, this kind of thing. So that's sort of a typical time. And for students with chronic health conditions or physical disabilities in particular, it really can be important to sort of factor in some of these considerations around like what their needs are into that search, because it may or may not impact their college search, right? I often say that students with any type of disability should start their search just like any other student, right? Based on their interests and sort of what they're looking for in a school. And go from there. But a lot of the work that I do with students is starting to think about what are the accommodations that you might need in the college setting? So academics is one piece, but also housing, dining, recreation, transportation, sort of thinking about it more holistically. Many students who have accommodations in the high school setting have an IEP, an individualized education plan, or they have a 504 plan. Those plans don't follow a student to college. So some of the accommodations they might receive in those plans in high school might transfer to the college setting, but not all of them. And also your needs might be different in college, right? Like the housing pieces, the stuff that you don't usually have to worry about when you're in high school, like where are you going to get your food? And if you have food allergies or specific diet, or like how am I going to get into the bedroom? So, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't really apply in the high school setting that changes when a student is transitioning to a more independent living setting like college. And so it's really important to start thinking through those pieces. So I work with students to figure out what are the accommodations that we need. We use that to then inform the questions that they might want to ask the disability support offices. So every college, there are about 4,500 colleges in the US. Every college has a disability support office or a person who's tasked with supporting students who need accommodations on the basis of a disability. And they all have sort of different processes and different documentation guidelines. And they all all of those colleges and all of those people who work in those offices are different people and they approach their jobs differently, right? And so I guide the students sort of thinking through those pieces and how to have those conversations so that they can get the information that they need.
That's great. And in terms of the questions that you're helping to formulate, to the students who are transitioning to college, yes, there are, thousands of colleges and universities in the United States. In terms of their accommodations and the way they accommodate students, it varies from college to college. So just so I fully understand, and for the audience to fully understand, you have created, is it like a standard template of questions to ask?
There is a little bit of standardization, but I work with students one-on-one, right? So I'm able to work with them to customize their questions and to customize sort of the thinking so that it meets that student's specific needs, right? So some of the things, there are some sort of boilerplate questions that I always tell every student that they should ask. And I'll give you some examples now because it's already out there. This is right. It's already out there on the internet, that I've put out there. So some things that I'm always interested in understanding is I think students should ask the Disability Support Office people, how many people are registered with accommodations in your office? So how many students are you supporting? And that can be a really important question to ask because we know that 21% of college students report having a disability, and that's all types of conditions. So that's learning disabilities, that's health conditions, that's physical, that's sensory, it's everybody, mental health. But at any given university, that could be, somewhere between 10 or 20 or 30% of the undergraduate population. And then my next question is, okay, if you know how many students they're working with or supporting that receive accommodations, how many people work in that office, right? And so that you, the student, can better understand, like, if I have, more high needs, or if I need to be able to connect with somebody on a more personal level, am I going to be able to get that sort of support that I think I might need here with this school, given that student to staff ratio? Or is this a place where I'm going to have to wait, a week or 2 weeks to make an in-person appointment? Like, what is the level of personalization that I think I might need? And am I able to get that with what they're able to offer me here at this school? That can be really illustrative, right? To sort of help students understand. Because, many students, depending on the high school that they came from, it might be a smaller setting, or they might be used to more in-depth services and supports. And college is different. The law changes from IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the ADA says that students need to have reasonable accommodations. And I'm using air quotes because it's a broad thing. Like, what is reasonable sort of depends on the physical space, on the program, there's a lot of factors. And so students can ask sort of data point questions as they're going into these conversations to see. And then there's going to be a bunch of specific questions that students have based on, like, what their medical needs are, what their health condition needs are, what their physical needs are, what they can or cannot physically do. So that's a whole separate can of worms that I help students sort of navigate and think through.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And, building off of that, so, let's say you're a high school student, that comes from a relatively small student population, and you get that individualized, personalized attention. My assumption is the larger the university, the student to faculty ratio is not there versus the smaller schools. But again, that's an assumption. Mm-hmm. I would love for you to refute or to confirm that.
I guess the right answer would be, like, every school is different. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're wrong. Generally, I think students would find, if we're talking about like a large state institution, like 20,000 students or more, usually your first 2 years, have a lot of students, right? And then you get into your major courses, and those can typically be a little bit smaller. So you might have more access to your professors. But I always tell students, like, get to know your TAs, get to know your professors, like, reach out to them. Like, a lot of times professors are really excited when students are like actually wanting to talk to them.
Right.
And it's good for students to know their TAs and know their professors. Creating that sort of personal relationship can be beneficial, for the supports that you need, but also like professionally later on in life could be helpful. So the other side of that coin too is that sometimes, larger schools, larger public schools have more resources in certain areas, right? So they might have more staff available to support with assistive technology or to meet one-on-one with students. It really just depends on the priorities of that university and what that university is doing specifically to be more inclusive, or to support students with disabilities. So, these are all like really, intricate questions, and there is no sort of like one size fits all. I did create an online course though, on preparing students with physical disabilities and health conditions for college. And so that is a really important piece of the puzzle in terms of getting students and families prepared. So it's for parents, it's for educators, it's for healthcare providers, to be able to, sort of figure out and have a little bit of a DIY approach to navigating what the college search process looks like for them.
And I want to get back to that in 1 second about that DIY approach. But, when you're talking about, being able to request and get the supportive services, again, if you have a physical disability as well as a chronic health condition, what are the statistics in terms of, again, you're getting that care, and what that care is, again, is subjective, right? What is the correlation on student GPA, on academic success?
It's a little bit trickier to get because students with disabilities have to self-disclose in the college setting. So that means that they have to be the ones who are going to the disability support office, requesting the accommodations, getting approved for the accommodations. So there are probably a whole bunch of students who have disabilities and have not gone through the process to request formal accommodations for one reason or another. Stigma. They don't know about it. They don't have documentation to support their condition. There's a variety of reasons that students might choose to, or might, not go through that process. But we do know that in general, students with disabilities have a higher dropout rate than their non-disabled peers. So that is something that is problematic. That's also an area where, more research needs to be done to sort of figure out, was it that they couldn't keep up with the coursework? Was it that they were experiencing challenges related to their condition? What are the reasons that students with disabilities are dropping out of college at a higher rate than non-disabled peers? So like TBD, maybe that's somebody's dissertation research that they can help us out with. But I also think it probably has to do with like specific conditions too, right? So the needs of students with different conditions are different. Like we are all unique people. And so, some programs of study too are more flexible than others. Some programs of study are more rigorous and can be more intense. And so there's a lot of nuance when we're talking about students with disabilities too. And, I think it's also important to mention too, that like most students don't just have one condition or disability, right? So like most of the students that I support have two or more conditions. They might have a chronic health condition like POTS or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and they might also have generalized anxiety disorder or another mental health condition or Crohn's disease on top of that. Or, you can have a visual impairment and have a chronic health condition. So I think that those are like just sort of added nuances and considerations when students are sort of thinking about what place is going to be the best fit all around for them and how they're preparing themselves.
Right. And to your point, getting into the granularity of the accommodation, right? Because again, it's not just like one, it could be multiple different challenges and disabilities that the student's encountering, which again, I didn't know. And I think this is all illuminating, not just for myself, but also for the audience, because going back 1 second to the DIY approach again of allowing, educators and students, and what was the third group? Educators, students, and parents?
Healthcare providers, parents. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. But that's not mutually exclusive, right? So essentially it's DIY, but I still should reach out to Annie and Accessible College.
Yeah. I mean, so I recognize, I'm a parent and I live in the world. And I recognize that not everybody's going to be able to work with me one-on-one. So I wanted to create a space too, where people who wanted to learn about like, what should I be thinking about? How should I be thinking about these things? So my course has information on, the lay of the land legally. So what the laws are in high school versus college. It also talks about independent living skills that students should start to develop and how they can start to develop those skills while they're at home. And it talks about having conversations with disability support offices, hiring and managing personal care attendants. So if many students with physical disabilities need help with personal care, like bathing and eating and other sorts of personal care needs, that's usually a whole new world for students and families. If a student is thinking about going away to college and they need to hire and find someone to support them, there are a lot of ins and outs with that. So the course has 7 modules that covers all of these pieces. And it's a great way for people to start to just lay the groundwork and start to understand what the changes will be. Since I work with a lot of families that have high school students, like everybody's busy, like there's a lot of things going on. So I created the course with, the modules are all videos that are 20 minutes or less. So people can like do it do one in an evening, do some guided work and like go on with their lives. So, it's sort of bite size. It's built so that people can learn these things and then actually implement the things that they're learning. I come from a coaching background too. So I took that approach when I created the course, and I take that approach with my one-on-one clients too. There's a Peloton instructor that I love, that I follow, and he always says, I make suggestions, you make decisions. And
I like that.
I do too.
I like that a lot.
I feel like I should get something on my wall that says that, because it is very true in the work that I do with students and families too. I can guide people and I can give them ideas and I can help them navigate processes and point them in the right direction. But at the end of the day, the student's going to have to be the one who has to like implement these things and see them through, right? That's different for parents too. Oftentimes parents are used to being the key person. But when a student goes to college, they're typically 18, and then there are laws like Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. So the student needs to be able to step up and do that self-advocacy and have those conversations and articulate what their needs are. And that's a big shift for lots of students.
That's a big shift for any student, right? You've been at home, you come home, dinner or meal is on the table, laundry's done, yes, a lot of those responsibilities have been taken care of. And now you're out in the real world, at college, away from your family. So to your point, it's really, do you want to do this, right? Do you want this? Mm-hmm. Like you can only do so much. To your point, I make suggestions, you make decisions, which I love. I'm going to use that. Before I ask my next question, in terms of those 7 modules. Yeah. Those are on the Accessible College website.
Yeah. You can find information about my course on the website, which is accessiblecollege.com.
And I'll include a link directly to accessiblecollege.com and to that section of the website. So anyone who's interested in again, learning about and understanding, the different questions and nuances of securing services when your child goes away to college. I think this is tremendous. So there are two themes that are coming out of our conversation, Annie. There's a lot of, I don't know what I don't know, right? Because a lot of these questions you're helping illuminate, right? And there's another part of me who's and thinking as you're talking, I imagine you get a lot of, and again, this is an assumption, I didn't know that. Do you get a lot of that? Like, I didn't know that.
Yes. Yeah. All the time.
So I hopefully, again, as part of this, conversation, of course, including links to resources to Accessible College, again, Annie, your contact information is on the website. So if anyone has questions, but I also want to transition into how people learn about accessible college, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it through, healthcare professionals? Is it through high schools? Is it through, I know you have some partnerships with some great nonprofit organizations. Love for you to talk to, again, how people are coming across accessible college.
All of those ways. Yeah. So, word of mouth is still one of the biggest ways that people find me. Now more so than, previous years, social media, has been a huge boost. I do have a partnership with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. And so through the Reeve Foundation, students with any type of limb paralysis, which is another big tent term. And limb paralysis could be a student with a spinal cord injury. It could also be a student with cerebral palsy or spina bifida or muscular dystrophy, or a student who's had a stroke, and has some form of limb paralysis. They can work with me for free through the Reeve Foundation for up to 3 hours to sort of get a primer on thinking about their needs and thinking through these pieces as they're starting that college search or college transition process. And I wrote a guide for the Reeve Foundation, which is available online and on my website, navigating and transitioning to college with paralysis. And it's the first guide of its kind. And it goes through sort of all of the considerations or things that students with any type of mobility impairment or physical disability can be thinking about as they're starting to figure out what this whole college thing looks like. And so those sort of resources can be really helpful. And you mentioned, that I have other nonprofits that I work with too. I've worked with a couple therapeutic companies, pharmaceutical companies, the Muscular Dystrophy Association. I created a college readiness resource website with the Perkins School for the Blind, focused on blind and visually impaired students and college preparation. So there's great stuff on there. And a lot of this stuff is out there. It's just that families aren't always knowing that they should be looking for it. And high school counselors don't always know that it's available either, because many high school counselors have caseloads of 500 students to one at large public high schools. And so they're just trying to get kids to at least, fill out the Common App and think about one or two schools that they want to go to. And so the sort of getting the information out there can be a tricky thing, right? And finding the right people. So my partnerships with these organizations are really helpful because it gives people more awareness and understanding. And also just finding families, right? So many of the families that I work with know other families and other students who have similar conditions. And so that's where that word of mouth piece becomes a big thing. I'm also a member of a couple professional organizations like NACAC, which is the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, NACAC, that's right. And so that is all of the high school counselors and community-based organizations that work with students as they're searching for colleges. And it's all of the college admissions folks on the other side of the desk too. And I'm also a member of AHEAD, which is the Association of Higher Education and Disability, which is all of the disability support office people. So I go to a lot of conferences too, which is really helpful to sort of network with professionals. And I do a lot of conference sessions for professionals as well on supporting students with physical disabilities and chronic health conditions and going to college. So yeah, and I have a Facebook group too. So people who are listening, who are interested in this, can join the Facebook group. It's called College Success, Physical Disabilities, Chronic Health, and Mental Health. It's a very interesting group because it's again, a niche sort of topic area that wasn't being addressed in other going to college disability groups that exist. There are a lot of people who have really great questions about personal care attendance and going to college, or a student with a visual impairment and what they might need, and mental health pieces, right? How do I find a therapist? What can I expect from a college counseling center? So that Facebook group has created a really great community too, for families and professionals and students to have conversations that they weren't finding elsewhere.
That is amazing. And to that group, are you the moderator or has it naturally evolved to where members of the group are exchanging ideas and answering questions?
Yeah, so it's both. So I'm an admin and I have two co-admins. The two co-admins that I have are both college consultants. One who focuses in mental health and autism spectrum disorders and learning disabilities, and the other who works with students with all types of special circumstances, right? So physical disabilities, health conditions, learning disabilities, and college consultants, for people who don't know, because I didn't know this a few years ago, because that was not part of how I went to college. College consultants are people who are hired to support students with the college search process and applications and essays and sort of thinking through, what they might want to do in the future. And so the group that we have, has those professionals as well. But what does usually end up happening is somebody will have a unique situation like, oh, my kid has a feeding tube and they're starting school and we're thinking about how things are getting delivered. Like, what have other people done? And people will chime in with their personal experiences. And it's really great because, a lot of these conversations aren't happening in other spaces. And so, especially if a student might be the only kid at their high school who uses a wheelchair, right? They don't know they might not have a lot of people around them who have gone through that specific experience. So to find a group where, people are sharing these experiences can be really helpful. And from the student experience side too, like I'm on Instagram because I know a lot of students aren't on Facebook anymore. But I always, if I'm following a person who's in college and has a specific type of disability and is sharing content about that disability, I will amplify that content because more students need to see that. Because I work with students. I had a student the other day who has cerebral palsy and said, like, what does this even look like for someone like me to go to college? Like, are there examples? And I was like, yes, there are. And here they are. And I sent him a billion links. But, if you don't see yourself represented and you don't, and nobody's speaking to sort of like what your experience could be like and what the options are, it's hard to envision how it's all going to work. And many students with disabilities are really isolated, and don't have a lot of people that they're connecting with who share the same experience. So I'm sort of breaking down those walls too, connecting students. If a student's interested in a specific university and I have a student who's at that university, I'll often connect them, which is really helpful.
I'm at a loss of words. This is incredible because, it's you feel isolated. Yes. So I think that's what you said. That was your word. Like you feel isolated because I haven't met someone with my condition and you're the connector. You are showing, yes, that here's so-and-so who's experiencing or has that same condition. So there's that empathy that you're able to dispense pretty seamlessly based on, all the different activities and outreach that you're doing and the associations and the nonprofits and working with college consultants and high school counselors and parents and students. I think it really had to sum up this conversation, Annie, is where do we start? Right. I know you said junior year, like where do we start? Like, again, I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of a aspiring, college student.
Yeah.
What are those first questions? Where do I go? Maybe that's what it is. Like, where do I go?
Yeah. The educator in me was sort of chuckling inside and thinking, like, where do you start? You start in kindergarten. This all starts in kindergarten.
This all starts in kindergarten. Exactly.
Which is true in some ways, right? So it's like, no matter who your student is, developing independent living skills, like basic cooking or like learning how to like problem solve is like a skill that everybody should have, right? So like that's the base level. The other thing though is like if a student was tuning in right now, or if a parent is tuning in and listening to this right now and they're like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. What's going on? Depending on the type of condition that your student has, sometimes it can be helpful to like find the groups of people who are navigating the same thing. So for example, I'm doing a lot of work with the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and they have a lot of resources on like post-secondary education in college and things to think through. We created a timeline for students who have different types of muscular dystrophies or neuromuscular diseases for like thinking through each year from ninth grade through the end of high school, like what's the checklist of things. The New Mobility Magazine and United Spinal put out a resource on the 20 most wheelchair-friendly campuses, which I often say to students who use wheelchairs or mobility devices is a great starting point. It doesn't have to be the ending point. It's a great starting point because it gets you thinking like, oh, what could be? Or these are the ones that are like the best, right? And so those are 20 and there's 4,500 colleges in the United States. So like, are there other ones that are just different or maybe aren't as physically accessible, but still could be workable for me? Because, you know, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act is the floor. It's not the ceiling. And colleges can choose to go beyond what is technically compliant and make things more usable for students. And sometimes they do that. But you have to like knock on the doors and, you know, go jump through the hoops and ask the questions. So I think like finding the connection. People can start with me too. They can come to my website and I have a blog and they can join the Facebook group. That's always a good starting point. And I'm a pretty accessible person too. And not just because it's in my business name, but I'm doing a lot of the social media. I am available. And I love connecting with people. And if I'm not the right person, I can always point people to somebody else who might be better suited to support them too. So that's another thing I do a lot too. And Eric, just like one quick aside, you were mentioning, you know, empathy. And I was laughing internally because I was just talking with somebody about my StrengthsFinder results because I did StrengthsFinder, you know, a million years ago now. Empathy is my number one strength, which you wouldn't naturally think would be a great thing for an entrepreneur. It is a great thing as an educator, right? Which first and foremost is what I am. But it does really guide the sort of work and the way that I approach my work with students and with families. And I think that is a really helpful trait in this sort of environment that I'm in.
Oh, I would think so. I think it's a huge differentiator. You know, it's funny. Like we started this conversation about the entrepreneurial aspiration of starting accessible college, you know, based on the questions you were receiving. And what's also interesting, you know, in terms of, you know, previous conversations I've had with entrepreneurs, one thing that they stress is, you know, there's this misconception. Yes, to a point, you know, entrepreneurs and startups want to scale. Like, how do we scale? How do we automate? How do we, you know, go 0 to $1 million or tens of millions of dollars? You know, with again having the foundation in place, but not putting as much work in because again we have the systems in place. The other side of the coin is these same entrepreneurs, especially in the early aughts of their businesses, are thinking, okay, what can I do? How can I do the unscalable really well? So one example is customer feedback or consumer feedback. How do I go to my first 100 customers one-on-one to ask them, okay, do you like the product and service? And I think what you're proving is the scale in this instance, at least from my perspective, is that one-to-one, whether it's you or someone else or another resource,
right?
Because of the nuance and the personalization based on each student's disability or challenge. I
mean, it is customized and it's tailored. And I often joke too that I'm a reluctant business person. I am not a business person. Like I've had the learning curve has been really severe for me in terms of like learning the business side and learning entrepreneurial skills and changing how I think about things, right? Because I'm an altruistic person by nature and I'm a giving person by nature. I think like there is some of this that can be generalized, which is why I created the course, right? So people would have a good starting point and could, you know, but there is some of this too where there's just not a ton of resources out there already. And the individualized needs are so significantly different. So it is more hard to be generalizable. But, you know, I hope that people who work with me, and I think most of them would say this, that they actually like the customization of it. They like the one-on-one time because people have, unique questions. And oftentimes they want to think about the best, what's best for their student, or the student wants to think about what would be like the specific resolution or the specific path for them too. So, so it's a journey. I mean, and it evolves. Like some of these things have been evolving over the many years that I've been doing this now, and it will continue to evolve, I'm sure too, as I move along. That's what's scary and wonderful about being a business owner.
Right. It's like you don't know what's going to happen in the future. At the same time, you're seeing all these great developments unfold, which is, this is definitely where I want to end this conversation. One of hopefully many. Annie, thank you so much for coming on the Worthy for 30 podcast and sharing all of your insights and experience, for students with physical disabilities and chronic health conditions, when they are applying to college and looking for the right accommodations for their needs. Really do appreciate it. What I will ask, Annie, is, I think there's some links and some resources that you cited during our conversation. I would love to include those in the show notes. So when I do publish this episode, anyone who's going to be listening, you can easily find those resources Annie cited during our conversation. I'll, of course, include her social media handles, accessiblecollege.com. So, again, if any questions, please reach out, as well as that Facebook group that you mentioned. Yeah. Annie, again, pleasure.
Thanks, Eric. It was a good time.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Worthy for 30 podcast. Stay tuned for more insights from impactful business leaders. Don't miss out. Follow us on all podcast platforms to catch every conversation.